Greetings and welcome back to Trinity Place. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is a sermon for the fourth Sunday of Lent. And I cheated, okay? I cut about 2/3 of the story that is pointed from the Gospel of John today because it's just too long and too wordy and too repetitive. So even though you may or may not remember this story, it's John 9, 1 through 41. I will briefly describe how it ends so that I don't feel too guilty about cutting it off. And we ended it on verse 11, but the story goes on, as I say, to verse 41. Here's what happened after the man born blind washes Jesus' spit out of his eyes in the special pool to which he was sent. The unhelpful neighbors dragged the poor slob to the Pharisees, who got mad at Jesus for healing on the Sabbath, his second Sabbath healing in John to that point, I think. And then the Pharisees blamed the victim. They got mad at the healed man for claiming to have been healed, and even angrier that he claimed Jesus was a prophet. Then they dragged his poor parents in and interrogated them, and the whole thing, just hoping to hear them confess that the whole thing was fake news. But the parents confirmed that that man was in fact born blind, and asked if Jesus was the one who had healed their son. They said they didn't know, they hadn't seen it. Go ask their son. So the Pharisees were hopping mad about that and very frustrated, and they insisted that the formerly blind man denounced Jesus. But he wouldn't. And in fact, he got snippy and sarcastic with the Pharisees. And so they excommunicated him from the temple, labeling the once blind man a sinner who was in cahoots with Jesus, who was an even bigger sinner. The story then ends with Jesus catching wind of the fact that the man who had been abused because of his association with Jesus and he went to find that man. Well, then both the man and Jesus both agreed that Jesus is the Son of Man, whatever and whoever that is, because it's never quite explained. And in the end, Jesus makes one of his cryptic reversal sayings, in which he says, "I came into the world so that those who cannot see can see, and so that those who see will be blind." And then some Pharisees overhear that, and metaphorically they stick out their tongues at Jesus. And Jesus sticks out his tongue back at them, metaphorically, of course. The end. Now, honestly, I like that Joy Harjo poem a whole lot better than John's story, and I think it gets us to a better place than John's story. And by the way, if you're watching this not as part of our worship video, the Joy Harjo poem is "Perhaps the World Ends Here." You may already know, if you've listened to me enough, that I have a bad attitude when it comes to the Gospel of John. And I have tried giving that up for Lent this year, that bad attitude that is. And I have worked with John each Sunday and then on our Wednesday programs as well. But today I'm failing with my Lenten discipline. Honestly, it isn't John that bothers me so much as it is how the church treats and uses John's gospel. It literalizes it. It historicizes it. It takes John's stories and acts as if they actually happened that way. It treats the John's Jesus monologues as if they were verbatim reports filed by a scribe to preserve every word of Jesus's. It is as if Monty Python wrote the church a theological script based on John and no one recognized it as a comedy. Take the foot washing business, for example, that we're coming up to on Maundy, Thursday. We have daily showers and baths in most parts of this country. closets full of shoes and boots that we spend hundreds of dollars on, and nail joints at every corner where you can get a pedicure. And we want to enact a ritual of pretend humility because we think Jesus did that, because John has a story, a metaphorical story, a symbolic story in which he did that. Why not replicate the hot oil massage that he got from the woman with no name in the Gospel of Mark? John tells allegorical stories that are clearly meant to be highly symbolic, and we retell them literally as if they are the transcript of some hidden video. Today's edition is a story really about Jesus challenging the religious monopoly that was in place when he was alive, and which declared that Jesus was both the source and the substance of light in the world. Now, those who use Jesus as their lens can see, those who use Jesus as their lens can see, John says, but those who use religion as their lens are blind. That's John's message. Now remember, John is writing this story before Jesus himself becomes a religion. Jesus was still a subversive mystic prophet, unrecognized by anybody important, and proclaimed by John as the light of the world, not to mention the light at the beginning of the world. For John, Greek speaker and Hellenistic thinker, the world, as I mentioned last week, was a synonym for ordinary human evil that is encountered everywhere. The world is a bad place for John, full of sin and sinners. The light is from heaven, where Jesus came from and where Jesus will once again reside. Light good, world bad. Those who see the world through the lens of Jesus are the light to the world. Those who do not recognize Jesus as the light of the world are spiritually blind and part of the darkness. That's John. Now, you and I are modernists or even postmodernists. And we live in a much more nuanced world than John did. We know that we don't live in heaven, but we've all experienced a little bit of heaven in the world now and again. In fact, some of us may not even believe in heaven as another place or as a different dimension, but still we experience God in the midst of ordinary life. Some of us might not be sure about Jesus as in a heavenly figure, but nonetheless wrap our arms around his earthly wisdom. If we need a stark and clear distinction to recognize the distance between John's world and our world, look no further than the first sentence of this story. The whole story begins with the question, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, it was believed that disability was a symptom of sin. There had to be a reason for blindness or paralysis or disease or illness or anything that was considered less than perfect. The reason was sin, someone's sin. Now, most of us, if not all of us, would look to biology or genetics or microbiology to both pose and answer any such question. Sin, not so much. Science was not a lens that John had available to him. History was not a lens that John had available to him. Social sciences and psychology was not a lens that John had available to him. Even spiritually, John had far fewer lenses than we do. Besides Buddhism and Islam, John did not have the whole long line of Christian mystics and poets that we have. nor the whole history of wisdom found in Protestantism and Catholicism. We have an almost endless menu of choices when it comes to the spiritual lenses that we wear in our world and through which to see our world. Even within Christianity, there seems an inexhaustible number of lenses that we can choose. We do not have to live within the straitjacket of orthodoxy. We do not have only two choices to believe or not believe what we've been given, as in John's world, or as how John would define it. The problem, of course, is that our church, as well as most other churches, have not really caught up to this reality yet, even though we're several thousand years along. Sitting here in this worship space, there are probably at any given time roughly 30 sets of hearts and minds. And my guess is that if we did an inventory, that we would discover more than 30 spiritual lenses, because most of us wear more than one. So, Joy Harjo, meet the author of the Gospel of John. You both sit at our table, and this table is our lens. This table is a table Jesus hosted. The man Jesus, who spat and who was born in the blood of real childbirth and who laughed and cried real tears and who got sick and who got sick and felt bad like we do, and who struggled with his own dark corners just like we do. That Jesus who welcomed the likes of us and others to be at his table. The Jesus whose light shined because of his generous hospitality and his abundant loving. The Jesus who brightened our darkness because of the wisdom that he shared. That Jesus. The Jesus who apparently didn't pay attention to the rules of the Sabbath or religion any better than anyone here does. That Jesus. John, I'll take your Jesus and see him through the lens of my world, not yours. The Jesus I know is the Jesus that a postmodernist knows, not the one that you, John, knew or wanted me to know. And neither one of us knows the Jesus the church seems to be selling, but all of us have a seat at his table. If the world has to end, I would just as soon be here at this table when it does. So thank you, Joy Harjo. And you too, John, begrudgingly. Peace be with you.